Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. I am delighted to have in the virtual studio today, Barbara Waxman. You just wait to hear her origin story, the kind of work that she's done, the innovation that she's creating and pioneering. She is, in a few words, a coach, a life stage expert, a gerontologist, a speaker, an author, and an angel investor. That's an incredible complexity. I think really showing some of the breadth and depth that Barbara brings to her work as the founder of Odyssey Group Coaching. And it's an amazing story. Let me tell you a little bit about Barbara. She has helped to define the middle science life stage. She's passionate about building leaders' personal and professional skills so they can thrive while maximizing their effectiveness in the face of change and complexity. Her leadership in the coaching field has culminated in the transformative coaching model, entrepreneurship turned inward. And I was just chatting with Barbara earlier before the show. We're going to dig into that. I think it's so important to everyone in our audience and a lot to learn there. And her science-based 5 essential elements process. She's an advisor to the Stanford Center on Longevity and the Stanford Lifestyle Medicine, as well as Generations Over Dinner Project. Additionally, she's a faculty member at Chip Conley's Modern Elder Academy. And while doing my homework on Barbara, I noticed a lovely testimonial from Chip about Barbara. So when you visit her website, barbarawaxman.com, I'd encourage you to, for those of you who are friends and followers of Chip, to see his lovely testimonial for Barbara. And she's been featured in Marin Magazine, Arianna Huffington's Thrive Global, appeared on CBS This Morning, and has the good fortune of having no shortage of podcast hosts who want her on their show. So I am delighted that Barbara's here. Maybe she'll also talk a little bit about some of her writing work, whether it was the Successful Healthcare Professionals Guide chapter or the Future of Resilient Leadership, and her other books examining aging. So Barbara Waxman, what a pleasure. I've said the formal part of you, you know, what gets put out in bios that are sent ahead and in advance. How would you like to introduce yourself beyond these like wonderful words of coach and life stage expert and gerontologist and speaker, author, and angel investor?
Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here because our conversation in preparation for this conversation was so rich, right? We could have gone on, and your focus on leadership and authenticity is near and dear to my heart. So in order...
just as a teaser for everyone, Barbara wrote an article, 5 Rules for Authenticity. It's coming up later in the episode. Sorry, Barbara, for the interruption.
I'll leave you with those tips. So you reminded me of a funny little story. I walk once a week with my friend Lisa, and we've known each other for years. And when we walk, we discuss her theme of the week. And knowing me authentically, we go through my multifaceted prism like days because authentically me is complex. I enjoy so many different things. And so I have this portfolio life and career, which I'm happy to share with you in service of all the listeners who are in the leadership business, whether they're leading companies or they're coaches. I work with both of the above, or individuals leading their families. How can we best be authentic? And to start that, I'll share my story, because being authentic is actually taking the time to know your own story. And mine is kind of interesting because I'm a gerontologist, as you mentioned, Mike. And many people might think that means I'm a doctor for the elderly. That's a geriatrician. A gerontologist is someone with a master's in adult development and aging, because we continue to develop as adults, even though there's this sort of psychic image that there's infancy, toddlers, adolescents, young adults, and then there's adult line until you retire, and that's the end.
Right.
Well, I am here to tell you later in the podcast why there's so much exciting news on that front of leadership and aging and longevity and health span. But to get to that, I should tell you a little bit about how the heck I got into this field. When I was probably 7 or 8 years old, my father, who was a physician, I grew up in New York, would take me with him to the Menorah Home and Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. And he would let me roam the halls of this nursing home while he would see patients. He knew I wasn't going to get in too much trouble, so I'd wander, and I remember the linoleum floors, that antiseptic smell, and I would peek around into the doors, through the doors into the rooms, and people would invariably say, "What's a nice little girl like you doing in a place like this?" And I made friends, and I made people smile. And as a young child, no one had told me to be scared, to not to want to go, and I would always leave feeling happy. Why? Because part of the secret sauce is if you give, and I didn't even know I was giving youth, fresh energy, love unconditionally to these people in a nursing home who needed it, you get more back. So I left feeling like I wanted more of that. Well, over the years, I became a recreational therapist and worked there every summer during my college years, and started studying this field of gerontology, adult development and aging, when the field, ironically, was in its infancy. So I've been in this field, which now people say, "Oh, you're so smart." I say, "I'm not that smart. I've been in the field since before it existed," and have seen the evolution. So to understand me and my BHAG, and for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's a big, hairy, audacious goal. That is to combine the fields of leadership, which I'm also schooled in, longevity, and then the 5 essential elements you mentioned is understanding the energy required to successfully manage leadership and longevity at the same time, both from an individual level and as leaders in the world making an impact. So that's a little bit, a really short piece on how I got to be a gerontologist. By the way, I became a coach by accident. Authentically, another interesting dynamic that every one of us needs to pay attention to. For years, people had asked if I would coach them. Now, I've lived in California for 30 plus years, but if you remember, I said I grew up in Brooklyn. When people said this, and coaching was in its infancy, this was around 2000, I thought, why would someone need a coach? I had 3 kids at the time who were middle school and younger, and I didn't really pay attention. I didn't listen. I wasn't present to actually hear and think, why are so many people asking me? And then through a series of events, I couldn't avoid resolving that question anymore. So I looked into what, in fact, a coach does and recognized that there were 0 master's level gerontologists and certified coaches in the country at the time. So I went back to school, recognizing that coaching is a powerful skill set, and started the Odyssey Group in 2005. And since then, have coached individuals, have spoken to groups, have been on podcasts, teach workshops at lovely places like the Modern Elder Academy in Baja. And my BHAG is to impact others so they can go on and help make the world a better place, whether that's in their home or on a larger stage.
It's interesting, as you described your growing up years, it reminded me that the most agile learners are often children. And, if you want to look for agility in learning, and I wonder, if that's part of what was going on at that moment in time that reinforced these good feelings and help lead you later to working there in a different capacity and charting you on a career.
I think that's a very important and layered point that you're making. One is learning more for the young. Are we more agile at learning? We're actually not more agile, but we're more open. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know any better than to imbibe the experience, so to speak. And at the same time, I didn't have the perspective, the self-knowledge, the time on the planet to put together that I left feeling better. I mean, some of what I share is as an adult recognizing my origin story.
Sure.
And each one of us has an origin story. Mm-hmm. But so I think that is a really interesting and important point.
Yes, so important. And you also used a word in one capacity, and you'd have to refresh me, but the word was complex. And maybe that was an attraction to complex ideas or complex issues. Someone once described me as being complex, and I didn't really know how to take it at first. I probably was offended.
I think it's a good thing.
But, in some ways, as I reflected on that, sure, lots of layers, wrinkles, and I appreciate that.
So I don't know if you mean actual wrinkles, which I have some of those, but to that point, complexity, and why is it that I enjoy and focus on working with what I call adults, midlife and better? And we can talk about middlescence later, but for this point, why? Because when we're younger, we actually don't have as much complexity because we don't have enough time to go through the journey of life that takes us ups and downs, the hills, the valleys, the plateaus. And I think we become more complex as we're older. We have more baggage, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that's where I distinguish for people. Therapy is essential and of critical importance. When people have so much baggage, it is weighing them down, and they need help opening up their bag, figuring out what's in there. I'll say to people, if you know your baggage, because as I said, we all have it, we are complex, but you can lift it in the overhead. As a coach, my job is to recognize it and take it on the road. So I take the complexity and the awareness of it as a very positive thing.
Oh, sure. And as I reflect on that, I've liked the psychology, John and Joyce Weir. John believed that in his model of healthy psychological development, men didn't really mature until their late 30s, like 38. He sort of pegged it as a way of, it's when they became adults, as a way of being able to kick out parental caregivers and others out of the psychic house. But all of that aside, I'd really love to, continue our conversation around entrepreneurship turned inward. And the reason, one reason I'm fascinated, and this is based on my limited perspective and knowledge of what you're going to help us to learn on entrepreneurship turned inward. I'm interested because to me, it conveys some sense of using yourself. And the use of self literature is growing. It's always been present, but it's certainly growing in organization development. And there's a body of work around use of self. So I'm interested, and I think our audience will be interested for those who are continuing to explore those intersections, what that means, entrepreneurship turned inward.
So the American way, more than Europe, more than China, has always been this rugged individualism, for good and for bad. And as a result of that, we've come up with this idea that entrepreneurs, these typically individuals who see a problem and want to attack it and resolve it in sensible ways that actually also create good in the world, hopefully, and businesses, we consider them kind of sexy, right? We want to invest our money, our social contacts, our all kinds of networks and our energy to entrepreneurial endeavors. So when I started working with C-suite leaders, mostly CEOs and COOs of organizations who are leading all these virtual teams, I recognized that I needed the language, because language is so important, to enable these extremely busy people, men and women, but men tend to be more tend to want to become less vulnerable to the public. So I thought, what language will enable people to get the same results out of a coaching methodology I have based on adult development? And I thought, well, what if we turn this whole idea of entrepreneurism on its head, and it becomes about you are the product. We're taking care of the business of your life and looking at you both from the outside in and from the inside out. And those are exercises I do with clients to say, how can you discover your idealized best self? What is that product, right? Then how do you build your capacity to sustain that is the next step in this model. And then people are inundated with responsibilities, with choices, with relationships, with gremlins, which are those internal naysayers we all have. How do you quiet the mind and focus? And you do that by defining your drivers. What drives me? So I know what I say yes to and what's a clear no. And only after you do those three things, which don't take that long, can you really create a roadmap and engage, as I call it, engage with intention, and then celebrate. So few of us celebrate, which again gets your energy, gets your focus, and breeds more energy and focus, because things, as we have learned, especially over the past few years, change. And there are troughs, and challenges coming. So ETI, entrepreneurship turned inward, is sort of coaching for a new kind of ROI, return on investment.
It's interesting. I think about the executives with whom I work and their teams. And more often than not, they're really not teams. They're groups of individuals. Some perform better than others. And I was thinking about that in relationship to this entrepreneurialism, because I think many of these folks who rise to most senior levels in organizations often do so because of some entrepreneurial spirit and perhaps know-how of different domains. Is something like that similar to your experience, or?
Refine that for me a little bit.
As you think about entrepreneurship turned inward, do you find it present in all kinds of individuals, or is it how is it distributed?
Yes. One of the things I like about the model is it meets you where you are. So for some people who are cowboys, they might use this as a tool and a coaching methodology in a way that gets to the same point of being able to engage with intention, have that plan, and then be ready resiliently. And that's why I wrote the Future of Resilient Leadership report. And other people, I met with a client yesterday who's a newly named CEO of a $7.5 billion international company. And he is a self-described servant leader. He responds to this just as well, because this idea of entrepreneurship covers and crosses all boundaries, really.
Yes, that's really great to know and to think about how it can be expansive
Mm-hmm.
and also inclusive at the same time. So that's really great to know that these these talents, these insights uh, can be developed. And Barbara, do you see them developing it? If you, I'd like to blend in middle essence, how
Middlescence.
yeah,
So,
Middle Essence. Yeah, I'd like to blend that in here and how
yes,
that might intersect or play a point.
thank you for bringing it up. So first, let me tell you what it means. The word
Right.
middlescence, like adolescence. So most of us have read or are aware. There's demographic news in the papers all the time and in the news that we've added about 30 years to our life expectancy over the last century. In 1900, life expectancy was 47 years old. Today, it's roughly 80. Yes, it took a hit due to COVID, but we won't go into those details. In general, we've added about 30 years to our life expectancy, and our mindsets tend to think, oh, I'm going to be older longer, right? We tack those on to the end. That is not, and this is such an important point, that is not how we experience the added years and decades in our life. What's happened is the middle part of life has expanded. And there is a myth of the midlife crisis. And it is a myth. But for now, let me just say these 30 years in the middle have meant that when people are 45 and better, there comes a time, by the way, adolescence, hormones change, bodies change, relationships shift, and there's an identity reformation saying, who am I if I'm not a little kid, but I'm not here, right? Well, this squishy part somewhere in the middle for people, hormones change. For men, it's called andropause. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't get talked about very much. For women, menopause, which is a huge market. I work with people in that arena, which is growing tremendously now. So hormones change, bodies morph, this time not necessarily in ways that we're so crazy about. Relationships shift, empty nest, divorce, new loves, change in career, all kinds of relationships. And then an identity re-questioning, have I been living someone else's dream? Who do I want to be when I grow up, even though on the outside I'm supposed to be a grown up? So we've created a new life stage in the middle. And as we know, if you can name it, you can tame it. Adolescence was only named in 1904 by a psychologist named Stanley Hall. Before that, there wasn't adolescence. Now everyone thinks, oh, that's a stage. So in 2016, I sort of put a line in the sand. I didn't make up the term, but I said, here's how I want to define it and use it. And thankfully, it's helped a lot of people. Um, and it's being used quite widely, as you saw CBS Morning Show and other places. So it fits into this leadership model. And this is a perfect um, segue or pulling together of everything we're talking about, actually, because it deals with the complexity in our lives. We're not starting a downhill slope. We're sort of at the height saying, okay, what's the next mountain? How do I want to get there? And that takes everything we're talking about, Mike, the self awareness, that entrepreneurial spirit where we are taking care of the business of our life. So that's what middle lessons is about.
It's such a great description and a wonderful concept to embrace. 30 years ago, one of my colleagues was writing about the two midlife periods, one from about 45 to 60 or 60 something, and the other from 65 to 80, thinking about it in terms of the choices that opens up and the opportunities that opens up in a somewhat similar way, I think, to which you described your concept, which is so wonderful.
Can I say one thing about that that's very timely? In 1935, when Social Security was enacted, and that's a whole interesting story, why it was 65, there was no good reason. We probably don't have time to go into it, but 30% of Americans were working at 65. In 2019, over 60% of Americans were working past 65. And in the next decades, over 90% of us will be working because there aren't those barbells of two midlifes now. When we understand how to extend our health span, which by the way means we have to be able to afford it, it doesn't make sense to retire. And so I'm also focused on retiring the word retirement, but rather looking at how do I maintain my health span and how do I engage if I need to earn money in ways that make sense for me at these stages.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, for employers, many of our members in our audience lead human resources teams. They're chief people officers. They're at different stages in their people careers, people and culture careers. It's all about managing, multiple generations in the workplace. I mean, you know that as well as I do. I mean, never then before have we had so many age diverse people in the workplace.
When we used to look at, and when you think, and the listeners think about, close your eyes for a minute, the population charts, kind of think of a triangle. That's how we grew up seeing them. With younger people, there are more of them. And then it gets, people don't live as long. If you think about it now, what it looks like is a rectangle. Mm-hmm. So we have consistency across ages. So we have the most age diverse country that we've ever had before. And in the workplaces, it's causing, lots of companies are bringing me in to say, how do we keep people engaged? Because there's going to be a brain drain. There are a lot of 60-year-olds who feel like I can't get employed. On the other hand, companies are recognizing we don't have enough people in the pipeline. We need to maintain people at a high level who can continue to work longer and have them mentor younger people so that there's consistency of leadership throughout. I've become an advisor recently to something called Generations Over Dinner, which is guiding conversations. We do it sometimes on Zoom calls. It doesn't have to be an in-person dinner. And more companies are taking advantage of this, where we're giving facilitated prompts and people across generations are responding. And it has been remarkable, really exciting.
That's just a great service and a great product and a great way to bring people together and to help people to bring more of who they are to what they do, I think, in the workplace. And everyone benefits from that. So I have to ask you, Barbara Waxman, what is your most valuable currency and how do you describe and talk about that?
So oftentimes people think their most valuable currency is what they've got in the bank or their contacts, their social networks. And that is part of it. But really, your currency is your energy. And I talk about energy in three ways. Your energy is your intrapersonal energy. Have you ever been in a meeting where someone opens the door, they come in a couple of minutes late, and the room is deflated? Oh no, this is going to be a tough meeting. And other times, someone walks in and it's like a ray of sunshine. Oh, we're going to be okay. What is that? That's their energy. And it takes, with age, with time on this planet, it takes more of an investment to cultivate the energy we crave to not only maintain our health span so it lasts longer, but to have the kind of focus. And there's a free link on my website to a research-backed quiz called the 5 to Thrive quiz that I welcome people to come and experiment with. A lot of coaches use it with clients to get a foundation, a baseline for understanding people's currency. So that's intra within you, personal currency.
Right.
And there's interpersonal currency, which has to do with those social networks and relationships. And if people aren't in the workplace, it has to do with not being lonely, having true connections, authentic connections with people. And then finally, there's universal energy, and that has to do with nature. Science shows being in nature reduces blood pressure, makes people happier, have more of a sense of equanimity. So your currency is intrapersonal, interpersonal, and universal.
Yes, it's so interesting because also in organization development, we think about currencies, but we think about currencies in value creation. So is it if you were in an academic institution, is that papers published as the currency of influence. So interesting to see how we think about currency and its dimensions.
I would say that the way I view that energy is the most important currency. If you don't have energy as your currency, you can't produce the number of papers that are going to get you tenure.
Sure, which all relates, I would imagine, to this idea about resilience and leadership as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I wrote this paper, again, free download on my website. I do this.
BarbaraWaxman.com.
Yes. And it's Waxman, BarbaraWaxman.com. I do this because what gets me excited is being that spark and getting it out there in the world. So I define resilient leadership as the ability to lead oneself and inspire others to act in the face of challenge and change with clarity of mind, body, and spirit to create good in the world. And this really came about during COVID, when I was asked by more and more clients to come into their companies and lead a wellness workshop to gather people as community, to make it interactive, and to have people leave feeling connected with themselves, with others, and feeling a spark. And I recognize that the future for the next number of years of leadership is really about resilient leadership.
Clearly. And I think as we continue to morph through some changes in work environments, it was interesting. I was talking with the chief people officer earlier in the day of this recording, and she said, I must be one of the most unpopular people in this Bay Area company because they were now requiring people to come in 3 days a week as opposed to 2 days a week. So these issues, I think, will continue to change and evolve, and the degree to be resilient and to demonstrate resiliency, to see perhaps hope in the face of despair, is really an important developmental pursuit.
Well said. Absolutely.
And I think that's perhaps what you bring to your work, is this sense of grace and care and respect. It seems to be a theme that runs throughout the future of resilient leadership, entrepreneurship turned inward, and your most valuable currency. And to see these qualities expressed, it's really a delight to see it all come together, and helping people in so many ways with understanding about adult development and aging, and opening our ideas to see more.
Thank you. Thank you. That is what I'm trying to accomplish. So thank you for being such a good listener.
And Barbara, just as we begin to wrap up, I want to tell people, let our audience know how they can reach you. We know that one spot is BarbaraWaxman.com, and that's BarbaraWaxman.com. But it'll be in the show notes, everyone. So, tune there. But Barbara may have other links for us to visit. And I'd like to give Barbara, and then I'll say thank you. Just as we're likely airing this episode in a change of seasons, any reflections on what it means to transition and move from one season to another?
Yes, and I did promise to share the 5 rules.
The 5 rules. Thank you so much. That's I want to hear those 5 rules for authenticity. Very important.
And they apply to this change of seasons because
perfect.
It's a time to reflect, right? When we shift, especially when we downshift into winter, and we're supposed to downshift. I have so many clients who will say to me, I don't know why. And every year, I'm so exhausted. We're supposed to be we are seasonal creatures. We're little animals. We can do all kinds of techie things, but we are still that way. So it's a good time to reflect on these 5 rules. The first is to own your story. Life is not a linear path. It's a journey and an ever unfolding story. So to lead others, to lead yourself, to be a good coach, it's really important to take the time required to know your story. Two, knowing your story will bring up all kinds of issues. It always does. It's that baggage thing we talked about. Number two is know that you are enough, just the way you are. I lead a workshop, and I'll be leading it in April at Chip's Modern Elder Academy in Baja on the beach. There'll be whales breaching. And I say to each person, you are a masterpiece already. So own your story, know that you are enough. And you need to do that so you can cultivate your courage. The very root of the word courage is a French word or Latin actually, and it means heart. You need to have heart to be the change you want to be for yourself and in the world. And that takes courage. Number four, be vulnerable. The strongest among us are those who are willing to expose parts of themselves and take risks. Any risk taker knows that being vulnerable is important. And then finally, anticipate that when you do all this hard work of inner soul searching, tactical plans, engaging with intention, that everything changes. And none of that will or quote should. I say to people, stop shoulding all over yourself. Things are going to change. Figure out what helps you be resilient. So those are the 5 rules.
Your 5 rules for authenticity are just perfect. And it's a great way to segue into thanking you. But how can our listeners get in touch with you, Barbara?
The best way is to reach out, Barbara at barbarawaxman.com. To get an idea, I would say just go look at my website. There's a ton of information in there and a lot of free resources. So those are the best ways. And I'm just we have 2 out of, I think, 18 signups because we just opened it last week for this 5-day mastery workshop at the Modern Elder Academy. It's about my 4th or 5th time offering it. It's really a wonderful experience. I learn every time I'm there, and the groups that I've led are still connected, and you don't have to be a group person to participate. So I would encourage you to look at my website and ask questions and come join me.
Oh, that sounds like an awesome experience. And I encourage everyone to visit barbarawaxman.com. Once again, thank you so much, Barbara, for sharing your story, your insights, your perspectives with our audience. You earn all of these titles of coach and life stage expert and gerontologist and speaker, author, and angel investor. So glad that our listeners have an opportunity to learn from you and to visit you at barbarawaxman.com. Once again, thank you. Until the next episode of the Authentic Change podcast with Mike Horn, everyone stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.